Take a look at this painting, completed in 1830, which depicts the English countryside. What do you think the people in the painting are doing? Did you say they were enjoying a roller coaster ride? Not quite. This is a painting of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, the first city-to-city railway in the world. When it opened, the railway didn't just transport people, it helped usher in a new era of advanced transportation, new technology, and economic transformation known as the British Industrial Revolution. In this lesson, we'll learn about this revolution's origins, evolution, and impacts. Let's dive in. The British Industrial Revolution took off in the early 1800s, but its seeds were planted a century earlier. Literally. Beginning in the 1700s, Britain saw great improvements in farming methods, which increased the food supply. This period, which would come to be known as the Second Agricultural Revolution, also sparked a population boom, which naturally increased the labor pool. At the same time, wealthy landowners took over large portions of publicly owned land across Great Britain. This enclosure movement forced many rural farmers to move in search of new opportunities. How might the enclosure movement have changed Great Britain? As the countryside suddenly had little room for small farmers, cities grew. As the population boomed and cities filled up, the labor pool grew. Meanwhile, in the countryside, newly privatized land was making the rich richer, thanks to Great Britain's ample natural resources, including coal and iron deposits. Those wealthy landowners reinvested their capital in Great Britain's overseas colonies and in the transatlantic slave trade. Colonization gave British entrepreneurs a ready-made global market in which to sell British-made goods. It was these four inputs, labor, natural resources, capital, and markets, that made Great Britain the ideal environment for an economic revolution, one that got its start not in the cities or fields, but in the home. For hundreds of years, women across Great Britain produced fabric at home in what was known as a cottage industry. Handmade textiles were made by the family, shared with the local community, or sold. But by the 1760s, as city centers boomed, textiles were no longer being made in the home. Instead, people, including women and children, began to clock in for long hours of strenuous shift work in large, centralized buildings. The age of the factory had begun. Textile mills and factories, where hundreds of women working hundreds of looms at once, all in one room, could produce lots and lots of fabric, began to open in cities across Britain. Quickly, textiles grew into a powerhouse industry for the country, helping to fuel further industrialization, the process of mass-producing goods using machinery. Of course, factory owners weren't content with steady output or profits. Hoping to create more efficient machines and processes that would grow their profits, they turned to engineers. Inventions like the British-made spinning jenny gave mill workers the power to spin several threads all at once, speeding up the weaving process. Faster weaving meant more fabric to sell. Eventually, even more powerful and powered machines came into popular use. They required energy to operate. Take a look at the exterior of this early textile mill. How might this mechanism supply power to the machines inside the factory walls? With its abundance of rivers and waterways, Great Britain had access to water power that could supply energy to new industrial machines like the power loom, another British invention. This machine sped up the production of textiles even further. As the textile industry took off, it sparked further industrial advancements. The demand for a cheap source of power was high, and steam pushed industrialization forward. Steam engines were installed in factories where they powered looms and other machines. With the combination of the country's iron ore deposits and the emergence of the steam engine, a revolutionary form of transportation took off in the early 1800s. Railways. Take a look at that railway from earlier. By the 1830s, when this passenger train was introduced, Great Britain was entering a period of railway expansion. Predict how the emergence and expansion of the railroad would impact industrialization in Great Britain. From its earliest stages, the emergence of railways created new jobs. Additionally, trains provided a cheaper way to transport goods to market, which in turn lowered prices for customers. The combination of lower prices and more jobs meant more people could afford goods, which meant more sales, which meant more money for business owners to reinvest in more workers and equipment, continuing the cycle of economic growth. The emergence of the modern railroad system completely transformed Great Britain into an industrial powerhouse, increasing its trade routes across the island, speeding up the rate of production, and helping profits to grow to new heights. Despite this impressive and continuous growth, not everyone was in favor of continuous, unbridled industrialization. Factories created prosperity for owners. But for the workers, the shift work, upwards of 18 hours a day, had awful physical and mental health effects. The paltry wages weren't even enough to prevent most families from sending their young children to work too. Children, some as young as 5 years old, worked long hours in stuffy, dangerous textile mills across Britain. And if they were orphaned, child workers operated as apprentices without pay but received housing in return. Seen as a common practice at the time, child labor was one of many brutal growing pains in the advancement of Britain's industrialization. Others didn't want anyone, children or adults, working in factories. The Luddites, a group of highly skilled craftsmen who, starting around 1811, purposely destroyed machines and wreaked havoc in factories across the country. This image illustrates action taken by the Luddites. Why do you think they are destroying machinery? Some Luddites felt threatened by the new machines and feared that the factories would render their own crafts and jobs useless. By 1816, the Luddites' short-lived sporadic activism came to an end. The British government even passed the Frame Breaking Act, making destruction of machinery a capital offense, punishable by death. The Luddites weren't the only British residents who questioned the direction in which the country was headed. As mills and other factories expanded, urban dwellers struggled to access clean drinking water, fought through overcrowded streets, and breathed polluted air. As Great Britain enjoyed the fruits of and battled the consequences of its Industrial Revolution, the technologies and practices that emerged there began to spread, first throughout Europe and then across the Atlantic, where more nations would have to grapple with whether or not these industrial advancements would do more harm than good. Now it's time to show what you know. What were some of the causes of the British Industrial Revolution, and what were the consequences, both positive and negative? Starting in the 1700s, Great Britain's expanded labor force, abundant capital, natural resources, and access to world markets all led to revolutionary change and a cycle of economic growth, all fueled by industry. As factories were built, wealth increased, while at the same time, long, strenuous work shifts, crowded urban areas, pollution, and increased child labor made many people, especially skilled craftsmen like the Luddites, turn against industrialization. Still, these revolutionary changes would prove contagious, and methods and technology expanded to other parts of the world, fueling further waves of industrialization. Thanks for learning with us today and for taking another step toward putting together the pieces of the past.